Hey everyone, welcome back to the Brand Direction podcast. I'm Aiden, and this podcast is brought to you by BBLD. In the last episode, we talked about the foundation of any strong brand, your organizational identity and your brand profile. We broke down how those two work together to define who you are on the inside and how your audience sees you on the outside. Today, we're getting into something that every brand eventually faces, the brand refresh. How do you know when it's time to refresh your brand? More importantly, how do you do it without losing what makes your brand, well, your brand? Let's get into it. So, here's the deal. Over time, even the strongest brands can start to feel a little dated or disconnected. Maybe your logo is starting to feel old school, or your messaging isn't landing with the same impact it used to. This happens to every brand. It's a natural part of growing and evolving. Markets change, customers change, and sometimes the way your brand presents itself needs to change too. But here's the thing. A brand refresh isn't about throwing everything out and starting from scratch. You're not reinventing the wheel here. Instead, it's more about modernizing and adjusting so your brand stays relevant while keeping its core intact. It's like giving your brand a fresh coat of paint, but making sure the structure underneath stays solid. The first thing you've got to do is figure out why you need a refresh in the first place. Are your visuals starting to feel out of touch? Is your messaging not connecting with your current audience? Or maybe you've expanded into new markets and your brand just doesn't reflect that growth yet. Once you've identified the why, you can start planning the how. One of the key areas to look at during a brand refresh is your visual identity. This includes things like your logo, your color palette, your fonts, all the elements that make your brand recognizable at a glance. Think about it. Your logo is often the first thing people see, and if it feels outdated or disconnected from the rest of your brand, it can create a weird disconnect for your customers. Sometimes, a simple tweak to your logo or just updating your color scheme can make a huge difference. But here's something important. When you're refreshing your visuals, you want to make sure you're not straying too far from what people already associate with your brand. Consistency is key. You want your audience to recognize your brand after the refresh, not be confused by it. It's about evolving, not becoming unrecognizable. Next up, let's talk about messaging. Just like your visuals, your brand's messaging can start to feel outdated if it's not in sync with where your company is now. Maybe your audience has shifted or your products and services have evolved, but your messaging hasn't kept up. A refresh is the perfect time to revisit your tone of voice and make sure it still resonates with the people you're trying to reach. For example, if your original messaging was geared toward younger customers, but now you've expanded into a more professional market, that casual tone might need to mature a little. Or if you're introducing new services or products, your messaging needs to reflect those changes clearly. Think of your messaging refresh as an opportunity to speak to your audience in a way that feels more relevant and authentic. Maybe you need to tighten up your tagline or shift the focus of your communication to better highlight the benefits of what you offer. The key is to stay true to your brand's core while making sure your message feels fresh and engaging. Now, one of the biggest parts of a successful brand refresh is consistency across all channels. Once you start updating your visuals and messaging, make sure those changes are applied everywhere. Your website, social media, emails, packaging, whatever platforms your brand is on, they all need to be on the same page. If your Instagram looks sleek and modern, but your website feels outdated, your customers are going to pick up on that disconnect. And trust me, consistency builds trust. One last thing to think about is the internal side of your brand refresh. It's not just about what your customers see, it's also about how your team understands and lives the refreshed brand. You want to make sure everyone in your company is on board with the changes. Whether you're updating your visual identity, your messaging, or both, it's crucial that your employees know what's going on, why the changes are happening, and how they should be representing the new brand. This is where internal training and communication come into play. Host workshops or brand meetings to explain the new direction and get everyone excited about the refreshed look and feel. When your team is on board, it'll naturally flow through to how they interact with your customers and represent your brand. So, to sum it all up, a brand refresh is like giving your brand a fresh start without losing the heart of what makes it great. It's about updating your visuals, tweaking your messaging, and making sure everything feels modern and aligned with where your company is today. And don't forget, it's just as important to get your team on board internally so they can represent your refreshed brand with confidence. Next time on the Brand Direction podcast, we'll be talking about a tool that can help you keep your brand in line as it evolves. The brand steering wheel. It's a powerful way to guide your brand's direction, ensuring that all the elements work together and stay consistent as you grow. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening to the Brand Direction podcast by BBLD. I'm Aiden, and I'll catch you in the next episode.